Greetings, heroes. Greetings, heroes. Can you hear me now? This is your friendly neighborhood Rabbi John Carrier, and I am here for a live recording of the Jew Curious Show podcast. So if you can hear me, I'd love to get a shout out to you. Where are you coming from? What's your name? What'd you have for lunch? I'd love to see what people have for lunch. I just had chicken soup. I'll play too. So it's been kind of chicken soup weather here in California, bouncing between the 30s and the 50s Fahrenheit, and a little bit of rain. It's terribly uncomfortable here, and so got a little froggy in my voice, and that is not kosher. But I apologize in advance and ex post facto. So love to hear who's out there, what's your name, where are you coming from, and what you had for lunch. And I may include this segment in the podcast recording. I may not, but that's our prerogative. So what I'd love to do is tell you today about Jewish weddings. This is a common topic when somebody's calling up a rabbi. Why might you want to call a rabbi? To get married, right? And maybe the rabbi's already married, but then you have somebody else you want to get married to. So that's a very good reason to call a rabbi. And so today we're going to talk about what are the steps to planning a Jewish wedding, if this is something that you need to plan. And I highly recommend planning. I can improvise pretty well, and it doesn't take a lot to make a wedding kosher, right? A lot of things can go wrong. That's one thing I tell couples all the time, because there's so much planning that goes into any wedding, Jewish or not Jewish. People are terribly anxious that things might go wrong. But I always say to them, this is the little secret sauce, any rabbis paying attention out there. I always take the couple aside, or maybe I visit them one by one right before the ceremony, and I say to them, look, kids, whatever happens today, you are walking out of here a married person. If something drastic goes wrong, if the sterno on the buffet catches fire, if the wind blows down the chuppah, the wedding canopy, seen it happen right before the bride walked out, they still got married. So I say, whatever happens today, you're going to get married. If something just drastic or disastrous happens, you're going to be married with a funny story that you will remember for the rest of your life. And people will be talking about it long after they forget what flavor cake you had. I don't remember what cake I had at my own wedding. I'm sure it was delicious. But I don't remember the flavor of any cake at a wedding. I do remember performing a wedding on a boat, or officiating a wedding on a boat. I've done it in a vineyard when we thought it was going to be a hot day, so there were fans for everybody to fan themselves. Turned out to be a terribly windy day, blew down the chuppah right before the bridal party came out. But we got it done, and those folks are still married, and they have like kids too, so it worked out. You don't have to have kids if you get married, but I enjoyed it. So in any case, we have our friends Kathy from sunny California. We've got Milo from Denmark. We've got Vanessa from Germany. Let's see. She says bim bim bop. I don't know if that's a type of German food that she had for lunch. But in any case, love to see people from the Jew Curious community come to these things with their questions. God willing, if you have any questions right off the bat for what goes into a Jewish wedding, what to think about when you're planning one, what to expect if you're going to one, what happens if you're in one, what you're married at the end of it, hopefully. So any questions, go ahead and throw them up on the screen, and I'll get to them as we get to them. I have kind of an outline to go through to make sure I don't forget anything, because weddings make me very nervous. I'm just kidding. I'm the rabbi there. The couple is the one who should be nervous, but shouldn't be. So I'm a little loopy. This ketogenic diet is really doing stuff to my brain. But anyway, let's talk about Jewish weddings. But before we do that, I just want to send a shout out to all the people who are watching this on YouTube, who may be watching one of my videos for the first time. You should know that I have about 160 other videos at this point. I've been on YouTube for about 4 years. I've had this channel for about 3 years now. So whatever questions you have about Jewish stuff, I may already have a video about it. I probably already have a video about it, especially some Judaism 101 type stuff. So feel free to watch another video, or some of the videos, or all of the videos. You do you. but I do have videos on this channel, and I'll say that the best way to stay connected in the future is to subscribe to this channel, and that way you will know when I've got new live events like this coming up, or less live events for that matter. If you are listening to this on the podcast, you should know that it was recorded during a YouTube live session, and I did that so that people could join me and ask questions live for the benefit of the Jew Curious Show podcast audience. So if you want to be on the show, in the sense you don't have to put on makeup that day. You don't need any kind of special lighting or even audio equipment. You can get on the chat in the live show and ask your questions on the chat, and I'll give you a shout out. If you just want a shout out, get in there, say, hey, what's up, Rabbi? And I'll say, hey, what's up, Milo? What's up, Kathy? What's up, Vanessa? Just to let people know that you're participating. If you have a question, I will do my best to answer that question live and on the spot. If I've got to do a little research or something, I'll make sure to get back to you. But I've done several Jewish weddings at this point. So if I have a question, if I have an answer for you, I'll give it to you live on the spot. And then people can listen to that in the podcast later, and you will have helped make the Jew Curious Show podcast the great show that it is. And if you're subscribed to the channel on YouTube, that's youtube.com/Rabbi John Carrier, you will know when new live events are coming up, what topics they are, and you can jump in and be a part of that experience. And I'm very grateful for the people who are here today, and for their sake, let's jump right into it. So, you're getting married. We'll just pretend you're getting married. So we'll start with the couple, right? I'll tell you when we get to the ceremony part. So if you're just going to a wedding, that's when you can start paying attention and ask your questions about, what to expect. How should I dress? Should I bring lunch that day? Probably not. They usually feed you. Questions like that. But I'm going to start with a couple who are considering getting married. The first thing you should do, and again, I'm a little biased because I'm a rabbi, but I think the first thing you should do after you decide to get married, and after you tell family members that you want to tell, like your parents should know, or people who are close to you should know, but the next person who should know is a rabbi. And this could be the rabbi that does your ceremony. It might not be, but what you want to do is call a rabbi to ask questions about what makes a Jewish wedding Jewish. Presumably, if you're watching this, if you're calling a rabbi, you want your wedding to be Jewish. And for a wedding to be Jewish, it's very helpful to have a rabbi walk you through what the different things are, and we're going to do this today, but it's helpful to have a rabbi walk you through the different elements of a Jewish wedding, what makes a Jewish wedding Jewish, what things have to be done, what can be done, what can you maybe do without and still be considered married. So it's nice to have somebody who's done a few weddings walk you through that. It's also important to call the rabbi before you set your date. The reason that this is important, and again, this may not be the rabbi that does your wedding. Many rabbis either don't do weddings or only do weddings for certain kinds of couples or couples in their congregation. Any rabbi can give you the right information, and they may refer you to another one if, for whatever reason, they can't do the wedding. But there's a general tradition around auspicious and inauspicious times to do Jewish weddings. For example, we don't do weddings during Jewish holidays. Many rabbis will not do weddings during Shabbat, right? So you don't want to call and put down a huge deposit on a catering hall just to find out that your favorite rabbi can't do a wedding that day because you booked it for a Saturday or you booked it for a Friday night or something like that. There are also seasons during the year, like the Omer period between Passover and Shavuot, which are considered, I'm going to say, kind of, again, sort of inauspicious. There's a kind of feeling of mourning around this 50-day period, and we don't have concerts, we don't have public celebrations, we typically don't have weddings. The exception being the 33rd day of the Omer, or Lag BaOmer. That's like a little exception day thrown in there. Some rabbis won't do it between Passover and Lag BaOmer. Some will just do it on Lag BaOmer. Some won't do it until Shavuot is over. And also many rabbis won't do weddings there's some fast days like Shevat Arba Tammuz, We don't we don't like doing weddings on fast days. We don't like doing weddings on Tisha B'Av. And Tisha B'Av, the ninth of Av, the first 9 days of Av are considered a less auspicious time to do weddings. And so the last thing you want to do is pick a date and then call around to a bunch of rabbis finding out that no rabbis can do it that date, and then you might have to move the date. This actually happened to me when I got married, and we had to move the wedding date. And this was before I really knew about dates and things like that. This was I didn't tell my wife I wanted to be a rabbi till 6 months after we got married, so she didn't really know what she was getting into. She's been very supportive ever since, but we had to move our wedding date because the date that we had picked, and we were, had our heart set on it. We were telling people, we may have had a deposit down or something, but we had to move it because we didn't call a rabbi before then. So you don't need the rabbi to approve every single little piece of it, but it's good to know that your date is on a Jewishly auspicious date on the calendar. There are some especially good dates, like Tu B'Av, like the 15th of Av is considered a nice day for weddings. I know when I was in Israel, I was surprised that when I would be in the market on Tuesdays, there were brides and grooms everywhere, because in Israel, it's lucky to have a wedding on a Tuesday. Go figure. So you want to call a rabbi, kick around some dates, make sure the date that you have is, a kosher date for a wedding, and decide if that's the rabbi that you want to work with. Again, rabbis have different policies about whether they'll do weddings at all or what kind of couples they'll do weddings for. I will do a wedding for any two Jewish people. Just throwing that out there. That's my personal policy. That means, whatever gender orientation those two people are is fine with me, as long as they are both Jewish. And that means we're born of a Jewish mother or converted through Beit Din and mikvah and that kind of stuff. That's my personal thing. So if that doesn't fit the wedding that you want, then reach out to me, and I can maybe find some rabbis who can help you. But happy to talk to anybody about this offline. So the next thing the rabbi is going to tell you is, here's some stuff. If you decide you want to work with that rabbi, the rabbi is going to tell you, okay, here's some stuff to think about. The rabbi will probably want to set multiple meetings with you and your betrothed, beloved. Hopefully they're both of those things, because there'll be meetings to discuss the different aspects of what goes into a Jewish wedding. Some rabbis also either hope for or require some sort of couples counseling, sort of premarital counseling, and some rabbis offer that themselves. Usually I'll set up 3 meetings with a couple, one to do kind of what we're doing right now and go through the nitty-gritty of a wedding ceremony, and then I'll have another session where I do recommend other outside premarital counseling programs, but I'll go through them, things like, okay, how are you guys thinking about what you want your household to be, just to make sure that they've talked about some of the big stuff you should talk about before you get married. How do people, when you fight, how do you fight? When you talk about money, how do you talk about money? Things like that people should really get squared away, at least start those conversations before they get married. So there's going to be counseling sessions involved. There's going to be planning sessions involved with the rabbi, usually like 2 or 3 or 4, depending on your situation and that rabbi. And the rabbi will also tell you a couple of things you need to get ahead of time. One thing is a ketubah. A ketubah is a Jewish marriage certificate, effectively. And this is something we've been doing since the time of the Talmud. This is a document that has the couple's name on it, and the date of the wedding, and the family names, and the place of the wedding, and the sort of covenant that the wedding involves. Just so you know, there's literally zero mention of goats. People always say, hey, the ketubah, this is, if you be my wife, I expect 300 goats. That's kind of a joke, but I've never seen one that actually said goats on it. It's just a joke people make. But you're going to need to get one ahead of time, because sometimes you can, they have like City Hall ketubahs. I don't know if they actually have ketubahs at City Hall, but they have these like City Hall kind of ketubahs that are very much like, you could print it off the internet and just fill in the blanks, and that's kosher. But nowadays, a lot of people are getting these sort of artistic ketubot. You can, there's one, it's kind of off camera here, can't see it, but we have one, and it's got all the legal language in Aramaic and English translations, but it's also got a beautiful kind of art arrangement around it with a picture of Jerusalem, I think. They'll have these Jewish motifs or artistic motifs or paper cut. It's supposed to look nice so that it can hang in your home. And some couples hang it in the bedroom. Some couples hang it in the main family room where the most people will see it. We always hang ours in the dining room. Wherever we live, the dining room is a central place in our family. So we always have our ketubah hanging in the dining room or dining area. So that we can see it all the time, and so that everybody who joins us for a meal, our kids included, can see our commitment to each other. So, but that's the kind of thing you want to get squared away ahead of time, unless you're just printing one off the internet and filling it out by hand. If you get these nice art ones, they can actually fill in the blanks with calligraphy with the couple's Hebrew names, and that takes time. And also, you'll want to ask your rabbi to check the ketubah to make sure they're okay with it, to make sure they spelled all the names and dates correctly. Some rabbis like to review the text of the ketubah ahead of time. So that's something you're going to want to get squared away at least a month or so before your wedding. The other thing you might want to provide yourselves with ahead of time is Kiddush cups. So in Jewish weddings, there are two times, and we'll talk about those today. There are two times where people make Kiddush. They say a blessing of sanctification with a cup of wine or grape juice, whatever's most appropriate for you. And so I like to ask the couple to get two separate Kiddush cups for that. And these can be things that you buy for the occasion. These could be two different family heirlooms. Maybe the groom has a Kiddush cup and the bride has a Kiddush cup from her family, or the groom and the groom, or the bride and the bride. However it works, you might have two different Kiddush cups, or you might buy brand new ones just for this occasion. But I like to have two, because with these two different occasions of drinking wine, once you say a blessing over a cup of wine, you can't say a blessing again over the same wine, which means after the first blessing, you would have to finish the cup of wine and refill it before the next blessing. And maybe you're nervous enough as it is. Maybe chugging a whole glass of wine would be helpful for you. Maybe it would be really unhelpful for you. But if I have two different cups, then you can sip on that one and sip on that one, and you're fine. So that's why we ask for two cups. So you got your ketubah squared away, you got your cups squared away. Some people, and this isn't Jewish law, this is just like an American custom, some people get special kippot, special yarmulkes in the bride's colors, or something that the couple pick out, and they're have in little stencil or embroidery, like wedding of Shmulik and Rachel, whatever. But just like a little takeaway from the ceremony. Especially if you're in a community where people aren't accustomed to wearing their own kippot to the event, and you want them to, because it's a holy occasion. And so there'll be like a little table with kippot that people could wear. And so those are the kinds of things you need to get squared away ahead of time. Once you have your venue in mind, one more thing to get squared away before your wedding day is the chuppah. Now, chuppah is a wedding canopy, and at its most basic form, it's got 4 poles and some kind of covering. Some people use it. You could use a sheet. Some people use a talit. That's a Jewish prayer shawl. And sometimes it's even an heirloom. It might be the great uncle or deceased great grandfather's talit that they use for the chuppah. It should be big enough for the couple to stand under, right? And you can also have a canopy that's mostly something else, but then there's the prayer shawl makes up part of it. It's also, I've seen them with a lot of flowers and gazebo kind of arrangements. At base, what you need is 4 posts or 4 poles and some kind of covering over the top. And these poles can be held by people. That's very kind of old school traditional way to do it. They can also be fixed. They could be you could have a gazebo situation. It just has to have 4 corners, a covering, and it has to be open on all 4 sides. There's some deep symbolism in this. They talk about the chuppah, the wedding canopy, as the first home, if you will, of a bride and groom, because it's like a little building. It's like a sukkah, right? And as the couple is entering this space together, they are like, we're sort of blessing them with the attribute of hospitality so that they can be hospitable to other people, like sort of the first Jewish couple, Abraham and Sarah. And we have this tradition that Abraham and Sarah, their tent was open on all four sides. That's how hospitable they were. They accepted guests from every direction. And so I think that's a beautiful midrash on why we put a huppah together the way that we do. So you're going to want that squared away with the venue ahead of time. Any place that does weddings, that's ever done a Jewish wedding, will know how to do this. Sometimes they got flowers on them. Sometimes they have a talit. But these are things that you want to square away. That brings us to the wedding day. But before I get into that, I'm just going to jump into the comments and questions real quick. Let's see. I found out that Bim Bim Bop is Korean. I don't know what that means, but I think it's a language. We did see, do they have bridesmaids? So there's most weddings I've been to do in fact have bridesmaids. This isn't necessarily a Jewish custom. What I want to separate, or I want to distinguish between what are Jewish wedding customs and what are customs that are totally okay at a Jewish wedding, but aren't necessarily Jewish customs in the sense that there's no like halacha about them. So, what does the law say about the minimum number of bridesmaids and the shade of purple that they have to be wearing? Nothing. What does the law say about the order in which the bridesmaids and the groomsmen come in? Literally zero. So we do need people. We do need at least two people getting married. It's nice to have an officiant. Rabbis are useful, but not necessary, as long as you have somebody who can legally perform the wet marriage in that state and knows the Jewish law of organizing a wedding. Any adult can do that wedding for you. It's just that rabbis get called a lot because, like, we know all the different steps. But you can have you don't have to have bridesmaids, but you totally can. And most Jewish weddings I've either officiated or been to as a guest or participated in as a groom have had bridesmaids involved and groomsmen as well. But there's no Jewish tradition or law about how many and when they come in and the processional and things like that. So how much of this, let's see, gift giving traditions. It's a tradition to give gifts at weddings. What's more important in the Jewish tradition is that there be a feast, is that people get to eat and celebrate and dance together afterwards. So much so that in a couple of different places, my favorite place being Masechet Shabbat in the Talmud, page 127, I want to say B, it talks about the mitzvahs that give you merit in this world and reward in the world to come. And one of those is providing for a needy bride, right? If a bride's family can't afford a celebration or a dowry, dowries were a thing back then too, it's a mitzvah for people to contribute to the wedding. How that looks in Western, and I'll say, well, I can't speak for Western, American weddings today, yes, people bring gifts but that is more a function of American wedding traditions than it is necessarily Jewish tradition. So the one thing you will see at Jewish weddings that you don't see elsewhere is sometimes the bride will give the groom a talit or a prayer shawl. In some traditional communities, men don't wear a talit until they get married, and so the bride actually gives a talit to the husband, and so that is a gift-giving tradition that I know about, but not a lot beyond that. It really kind of, there may be some in particular Jewish communities, but that's, ask your rabbi or the rabbi of that community what pertains there. Let's see. Rabbi will marry any two Jewish persons. That's true. What type of prenup is Jewish, please? Oh, goodness gracious. I'm so glad you asked this question because I forgot to mention one other thing that you might need to get before your Jewish wedding, and that is you might need a get. So traditionally, we have gotten rid of we've gotten rid of bigamy and polygamy a long time ago. Even when Jewish husbands, and this has been like more than 1,000 years. So no getting cute about this. It's been a long time. But even before that, a woman couldn't be married to two men at the same time. And so, from Talmudic times, and actually even from the Torah, it says if a couple is going to separate, they need a bill of divorcement. And so, when you talk to a rabbi for the first time, that rabbi may ask you, "Have you been married before?" And they're not trying to be invasive or anything like that, but they want to know if you've been married before. They want to know if you've been married before. Do you have a get? That is a Jewish bill of divorcement or divorce certificate that's been done by a Beit Din. And so might be a necessary step. If you've been married before, you should be divorced before you get married again. Just saying, it's good. That's just good all around advice. But if you were married to a Jewish person, you might need to have proof that a get was delivered. And this prenup question is great because the get question can create problems. Sometimes couples will get divorced and then they lose contact from each other, and a Jewish divorce was never done properly, and the wife doesn't have a get and she can't get married again. And this is a topic for a whole nother time, but it's an important one. And especially when you're putting the ketubah together, the rabbi may say, do you have some sort of prenuptial agreement? Not about a lot of finances and property and stuff like that, but many rabbis are asking for a prenuptial agreement that the husband agrees to give a wife a get if they ever get civilly divorced, and there are some penalties associated with that if he doesn't. So many rabbis, in order to keep women from being in the situation of what they call aguna, or being chained, by not getting a get, the rabbis will ask for, make sure there's a prenup agreement so that the wife is taken care of in case, God forbid, there's a divorce. So that's something that happens. Ping me if you have more questions about that. I actually sit on a Beit Din that handles Jewish religious divorces, so I have a lot to say, but I want to get back to weddings. Let's see what other wedding questions we have. Let's see. Why did they put a ring on the pointer finger? Excellent question. I'm going to go ahead and give a short answer now, and I might address it here in a second. We haven't even gotten to the ring part yet, but the pointer finger, you pointed this out in a Jewish wedding when the couple, either the husband gives the wife a ring only or they exchange rings. The ring is not put on the usual ring finger, it's put on the pointer finger. The midrash on this is that the pointer finger of the left hand is sort of considered most closely connected to the heart. It's sort of a direct line. You know, the index finger is sort of the strongest of the fingers, the most important. You know, it's like boss finger, but it's also the one that's most directly connected to the heart. And I like that midrash, so I'm going with it. All right, it's wedding time. One thing that happens, and this could happen before the wedding, like right before the wedding or right smack in the middle of the wedding, is that ketubah that we talked about is getting signed. And that's the wedding document. Now, traditionally speaking, the wedding document does not even have to be signed by the bride or the groom or the rabbi. In Jewish law, it just has to be signed by two witnesses. And these witnesses should be Jewish, and they should not be related to each other or either the bride and groom. This was a legal requirement to make sure that nobody was entering into, you needed disinterested parties to make sure that, yes, the bride and groom are the people who are on the page, or the people whose names are on the thing, and that they are both entering into it with full consent, and you needed disinterested third parties to verify this. And so in very traditional ketubah, there will be no signatures from anybody except for the two witnesses. Now, contemporary ketubot usually have like 5 signature lines. They at the very least need to have those two witnesses sign it. And then nowadays also the bride signs it and the groom signs it and then the rabbi signs it as well. So, and you can have, if you want to give out honors and have many people participate, you can have additional people sign it as witnesses also. The bare minimum for Jewish law is 2. And so sometimes this is done right before the wedding ceremony. Sometimes it's done right in the middle of the wedding ceremony. And I'll talk about that when we get to the middle of the wedding ceremony. I'll say every time I've been Jewish married, and for I'm going to say 9 times out of 10 of the weddings that I've officiated, this is done ahead of time just because it's easier and it's totally kosher. It's also a nice way to get a small group of people, especially if you got like a big wedding with lots of people who are watching and it's outdoors and it might be windy. If you want to get a small group of family and friends together, or just family, or what have you, together in sort of a small private ceremony before the big public ceremony, a ketubah signing is a nice way to do that. And so the couple gets together and they're sitting down in chairs. The ketubah is out. I'll say if you order a ketubah from someplace like ketubah.com, or you get it from a calligrapher and it's all rolled up, make sure you open it and flatten it out ahead of time before it's time to sign it, because it's very hard to sign if it's like this stiff paperboard and you have to unroll it the whole time. Just word to the wise there. But you have the couple, you have the ketubah there, the witnesses sign it, the couple signs it, maybe the officiant signs it, and you've got a signed ketubah. Often right before that, we'll do something called kinyan, which means acquisition, but don't worry, nobody's buying anybody here. This is a ceremony whereby the bride and the groom kind of tug on a handkerchief or tug on a pen. Like I take a handkerchief out or a pen out of my pocket and I say, look, if you're awake and you consent to this, please tug on this article so that I know that you're doing this with full consent. Conscious consent is very important to this process. And so people do that. They sign the ketubah, and then often there's what's called a bedekin, or a veiling, right? The husband will put the veil, or let's say whoever's not wearing a veil will take whoever is wearing a veil and pull their veil down before the wedding ceremony. This is considered a sign of the husband respecting the wife's modesty, or the whatever counterparty's respecting the other one's modesty, knowing that this couple forevermore, their beauty is sort of exclusively for each other. And so that's why we have a veiling ahead of time. Then after that, sometimes there's a little break for bathroom breaks, making sure the cameras are set up and everything like that. But after a short break, we go to the chuppah. And again, there's no Jewish law specifically on the processional or the recessional or the order in which people arrive. But typically the groom arrives before the bride, and then the bride, and I like to do this before people get under the chuppah because otherwise it gets a little crowded. Before they get in the chuppah, they meet sort of right outside, and traditionally the bride circles the groom 7 times. Now 7 is a number that has a symbol of completeness, and the number 7 will come up again in just a little bit. So the bride circles the groom 7 times, and we joke around and say this is a little bit like checking the merchandise, just like we had people pull on handkerchiefs to make sure, okay, this is the person, and everybody's cool with that. The bride sort of inspects the groom 7 times. Now in more egalitarian settings, you may have the bride circle 3 times, and then the groom circle 3 times, and then they, as my rabbi put it, do-si-do. They kind of circle each other. And then they enter the chuppah. I just want to go to a question real quick. We're almost there. We're almost about to get married, y'all, but we're just kind of the chuppah. Let's see. William Morales asks, is dating allowed? What about matchmaker if you can't find a prospective candidate? So there are different traditions for this in different communities. In some Orthodox communities, it's much more frequent to have a shidduch or matchmaking happen, where eligible couples are found and they might have 2 or 3 dates and then get married, right? And that's one way to do it. In other communities, it's just as wide and varied as the American premarital dating scene today. So I think it's good for people to know each other pretty well before they get married. Know that they have chemistry, right? Know that they have a physical attraction to one another. That is actually important. Know that they have the same values, perhaps most important of all. Again, this varies by denomination. This varies by Jewish community within the U.S. at least. But I'm staunchly pro dating. You should know who you're going to spend, God willing, the rest of your life with. So I'm going to take a short break just because I'm waiting for AAA to come get my car. And they're going to be here in about 20 minutes. So that's not your fault. I have a flat tire. Now, we are under the chuppah. Now is where it gets exciting. The couple has actually two parts to the Jewish wedding ceremony. There is the erusin, or betrothal, and there is the kiddushin, or sort of sanctification, solemnification, the actual wedding part. The erusin is like an engagement, and these ceremonies used to be separate. Many decades or centuries ago, there was an official engagement ceremony, which involved kiddush with a cup of wine and the exchange of rings or something of value. And then many months later, or even years later, the couple would then sanctify the relationship with kiddushin. In the meantime, they were sort of betrothed to each other. They were forbidden to be with anybody else. Nowadays, what we do is we take these two ceremonies and we put them together, and with like maybe a gap for a little Devar Torah or sermon or something in the middle. So the first part, the erusin, this is the betrothal. The rabbi or the officiant welcomes everybody in, and then the couple gets engaged, let's say. And this first happens with a blessing over a cup of wine, and then there is an exchange of rings. In a more, I'll say, patriarchal way of doing this, the husband gives the wife a ring. In the more modern egalitarian way, and just about every wedding, I think every wedding that I've done, I give the couples the option. They exchange rings together, right? The husband puts a ring on the wife's finger and says, "You are by this, in Hebrew, At mekudeshet li b'taba'at zo kedat Moshe v'Yisrael." Like you are dedicated to me with this ring in the eyes, in the laws of Moses and the eyes of the Jewish community. And then the bride makes an equivalent declaration and gives a ring to the groom, and then they are officially engaged. At this point in the ceremony, might take a little break. This is when, if you were going to sign the ketubah in the middle of the ceremony, this is where it would be signed. If you've already got it signed, often the rabbi will pick up and read the ketubah just so everybody knows the kind of promises that people have made to each other. Some couples like to write their own vows. I allow that in the very traditional Jewish wedding ceremony. The bride and groom basically just have to tug that handkerchief in the beginning. They don't have to sign anything. They don't have to say anything. And, some people, that's a relief. They're very nervous, as the case may be. But sometimes people will want to say something to them. And then that's also usually where I'll give a little sermon-y thing, like a Dvar Torah, just having gotten to know the couple, what Torah their union reminds me of. Are they like Jacob and Rachel? Are they like Isaac and Rebecca? Are they more like Abraham and Sarah? Are they like some other couple? Because I like to make it clear to everyone there that this is a joyous occasion, not just for this couple, but for the whole Jewish community. And the thread of their lives is woven into the tapestry of our people's narrative. And so that's why I give a little bit of Devar Torah there, but not too long. The people aren't there for me. People are there to see a wedding happen. And so right after that, after about a 5 to 10 minute engagement, we jump right into Kiddushin. And Kiddushin is the thing that makes them married. It means sanctification, or the solemnification of that marriage. And that is accomplished by what's called the Sheva Brachot, or 7 blessings. This is another set of blessings done over a cup of wine in a Kiddush cup. You could use Dixie cups. If you don't have a Kiddush cup, you'll still be married, but it's nice to have a nice cup there. And so these are various blessings. We bless God for creating the fruit of the vine. We bless God for creating a beautiful world for us to live in. We bless God for creating human beings who can rejoice in being a couple. We bless God for having a community to embrace this couple in this moment of sanctification. So we have 7 blessings total, and it's those 7 blessings that actually make them married, if you will. So after the 7 blessings, they're kind of married, right? And so there's just a few more things to do. I'll often give the Birkat Kohanim. It's a nice blessing from the Jewish tradition, from the Book of Numbers, to them. And then I just say, like, according to the laws of Moses and Israel, and by the state of California most of the time. I've done one in Las Vegas. That was interesting. But by the holy law and by the laws of the state, they are a couple. And there's usually one more thing that happens, and then I let them kiss each other. Then I don't make them wait too much longer. And then there's one more thing that always happens at Jewish weddings, and that is a broken glass. Now, this is like, if you don't know anything about Jewish weddings, you know that there's a glass broken at the end, and everybody shouts Mazel Tov, and then they go off and eat and drink and start dancing. But this is the last thing I'll talk about today. With the breaking of the glass, because again, the most identifiable Jewish symbol of a wedding more than anything else, because I don't know anybody else who does this. This goes back more than 1,000 years, probably 1500 to 2,000 years. There's a story in the Talmud where there was this sort of curmudgeon of a rabbi, if you will, and he was still sore about the destruction of the temple. Now, we take the temple very seriously, but this one guy was at a fantastic wedding feast. Everybody's dancing and partying and running around, and yay! And this one rabbi picks up a vessel, like a glass or something really nice worth 400 zuzim, expensive glass, and he throws it on the ground and shatters it. And everybody stops what they're doing. And they're like, "Why did you do that? You're a terrible wedding guest." And he says, "I can't believe everyone's rejoicing when we still have not restored the temple." And so he wanted to bring everybody's attention to that. And I don't know if he got invited to a lot of weddings after that. But to this day, we take a glass, and it doesn't have to be like an expensive glass. Some people use a light bulb because they're easier to break. Gentlemen, if you're going to break the glass, break the glass. I stepped on the stem of a wine glass. It was very undramatic. But some people use a light bulb because it's easier to break, makes a nice satisfying popping sound. Should be made of glass. But the essence of that story is the acknowledgement that there is, even amidst celebration, brokenness yet in the world. And right before the couple breaks this glass, I say to them, I don't go on and on about all sorts of historical tragedies, but what I do say to them is, you came in from a broken world, right? And you're going back out of this chuppah to a world that still has some pieces that needs to be put back together. The difference is, now that you're leaving the chuppah, you are leaving the chuppah to face that brokenness in the world as a couple, as a family, as a team. And God willing, you never have to face that brokenness alone again. And that's the end of a Jewish wedding. And from that point on, I always tell the couple, like, get in the chuppah, you leave the chuppah. My job is all in the chuppah. What you want to do afterwards is your business. It is customary to have a big feast and dancing and celebrate. It's considered a mitzvah to dance with the couple at the wedding. So when I officiate a wedding, I don't, sometimes I stay for the reception, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I've got another thing to go to. But I always like to stay at least for that first hora, that first big dance, and participate because it's a mitzvah to celebrate with the bride and groom. So I'm going to take a look at just a couple of more questions in here. Unfortunately, I've got to cut it short today. I got AAA outside waiting to help me with a flat tire. And don't get me wrong, I know how to change a tire. But my spare was flat, so we called AAA. So we talked about dating allowed. I think that's all the questions we have for today. How much of the ceremony is embellishment? Like, how much can be cut out and still have a Jewish wedding? Now, to have a Jewish wedding, to have it, there's a lot you can get wrong and still have it be a Jewish wedding. I do like to have a ketubah. I think that's important. That's just a wedding document. It could be fancy, it could be simple, but I do like to have a ketubah. I do like to have, there's wine drank at least twice. There was one time I did this wedding on a boat, and we were about to shove off, and nobody could find the Kiddush cups. And I said, look, if we have to do this out of Dixie cups, we can, and you'll still be married. Luckily, they found the Kiddush cups. So I've kind of given you the core of a traditional wedding. You only need one ring necessarily traditionally, but I like to give people more egalitarian options. And anything you do beyond this is pretty much okay. As long as you're not invoking other religions and things like that, it's still considered a Jewish wedding. I'm not going to comment on interfaith weddings. I have lots of friends who are interfaith married. I was interfaith married the first time. So I'm just trying to give you the essence of what makes a Jewish wedding a Jewish wedding. So this has been great. I really appreciate people's great questions, and certainly if you have questions after this, reach out to me on Facebook. You can private message me. You can find my Facebook page. You can continue to put questions in the comments to this video. If you liked this video, do me a favor and give it a thumbs up down there. Make sure I know that you like this video, and if you want to see more like this, make sure you're subscribed to my channel so that you can see when I'm doing more live videos like this. And that's a Jewish wedding. I really appreciate everybody doing this learning with me today. And until next time, heroes, peace.